So welcome everybody, my name is Sarah Ockwell-Smith and today I'm going to be talking to you about preparing your child to start school for the very first time. So here I'm talking about mostly sort of 4-year-old, maybe 5-year-old children to start school in a sort of mainstream schooling system, predominantly in the United Kingdom. So what I'm going to do is give you a sort of a brief overview of my top tips to help your child in the run up to school starting. And I'm sort of suggesting that you start this a month or two before they begin school. What I'm going to be doing as we talk through is looking at practical tips to help your child to start school and emotional tips to help your child to start school. We're going to be looking a little bit about you and also thinking about COVID implications and how sort of the recent changes and sort of lockdowns may be implicating your child. So let's get started. First of all, I always talk about practical preparations because I genuinely believe that if you did no other preparation, which is absolutely not what I'm suggesting, but if you were going to prioritize something, my priority would always be the practical preparations. And I think this really confuses a lot of people because ordinarily with my work, I'm all about the emotional preparation and preparing them emotionally to be separated from you. But actually, I really do believe that preparing practically actually is 90% of what you need to do to help them to settle into school well. But there is also some other emotional preparation that you need to do, and that's preparing yourself, which obviously, you know, it's a huge transition and a huge step for you. So if you look at the screen here, this is just an overview of what I want to cover with you in the next hour. All right, so practical preparation, in my opinion, goes a huge way towards getting children prepared emotionally, because the more that you can prepare practically, the more comforted they feel, the more secure they feel, the more safe they feel, the more they understand what's happening and what's expected of them. And when you put a child in that situation, then it is much easier for them to cope with the emotional transition of starting school. So how do you prepare practically? What I should do at this point is to warn you that I'm going to put up quite long lists of things that I think are a great thing to do before your child starts school. Please don't think, oh my goodness, there is so much and either I've done very little or I've done none of that. I don't want to make you scared. I just want to give you lots of ideas of ways that you can help your children. So it's not a tick box. I must tick that off. I must tick that off and so on. I don't want to make anybody anxious and to think I've got so much to do. I haven't done enough. This is stuff to work towards. And it may well be that you don't do all of this when your child starts school, and that's just fine. You know, there are a lot of children whose parents don't really do very much in particular to prepare them, and they're just fine too. So please take this in the spirit that it is meant, not as a way to scare you. So what should we consider practically? Well, everything that I'm going to talk about for the next sort of 5 or 10 minutes or so is all designed with helping the child with the independence, the increasing independence of perhaps they've been at home with you full time, perhaps they've been in preschool or nursery, perhaps they've been in daycare. So they may be used to being separated from you, but moving to school normally means that they're expected to do a little bit more by themselves. Now, also, please don't be scared here and think, wow, this is insane. My child is really expected to do all of this, because they're not. Obviously, when they're little, there's lots of help. There are teachers, there are teaching assistants, there are midday assistants. There are lots of adult helpers to help them. However, if you have a class of 15, 20, 30 children, they can't all be helped at the same time. So having some independent skills will really help your child if they can't be helped at that moment in time. But also the more autonomy they have and the more skillful they feel at these things, then what you tend to find is the more confident they feel with the whole school experience. So my first tip is to make sure that your child can dress and undress. And you're probably thinking, well, you know, kind of my child does do that, particularly undressing. My daughter at this age used to just love being undressed all of the time. But actually what's really important here is that they learn to put their clothes back on again. So here I'm thinking of sports games, PE lessons. So when they get themselves undressed, can they then put their clothes somewhere that they'll know where their clothes are and can identify them? Something I'll talk about a little bit later. But can they actually put their clothes back on them again? And a bit later, I'll talk about how to make things easier for them and how to choose clothing and uniform that makes things as easy as possible for them. But one thing that I would be focusing on over the next few weeks and months is practice runs with the uniform, with the child putting the clothes on themselves. So can they put their top on the right way round and not back to front? Can they pull up their trousers or their skirt or their shorts or whatever it is that they're wearing? But just the practice runs of getting dressed and things like taking shoes on and off will be really helpful. As I say, there'll be help for them. They're not expected to do all of this alone, but just giving them those skills to be able to do it will help them to feel more confident. So what else? Independent toileting. So for most children, they will be independently using the toilet and out of nappies. I do understand some will still be in nappies, and if that's the case, you know, it's not what I'm going to talk about here, but I would be having a chat with the school about that. It's more common than I think people realise, so please don't worry too much, particularly if there's some special educational needs involved there. I would just be having a chat with the teaching staff before September or August, depending on where you are in the world. But what I'm talking about now is children who use the toilet independently. And there are two things I focus on. One I haven't written is, do they know how to use toilet paper to wipe themselves, particularly when they've had a poo? So what you don't want is either the child desperate. I should apologise, I talk about toilets and poo quite a lot in this webinar. I think it's unavoidable with this age range. But what you don't want to happen is they really need to go to the loo, particularly to have a poo when they're at school, but they avoid going because they're very nervous about cleaning themselves up afterwards. So we could end up then seeing a pattern of withholding or constipation, or which actually in some cases can lead to soiling. So we want to just make sure that they know how to wipe themselves, and for your sakes that they know how to wipe themselves so that their knickers are, or their pants are not really quite revolting when they come home. So I would be working and practicing on that over the next couple of weeks. But I think actually the most important thing about the going to the toilet that gets overlooked is teaching a child how to lock and unlock a door in the public toilets or in the school toilets. So obviously if the child goes to the loo and they're not used to the lock, because the sort of locks we get in toilets tend to not be the same sort that we have at home, so they may be quite new to your child. And if they go to the loo and they don't know how to lock it, and a school friend barges in on them, the embarrassment of that can be quite stressful. Tend to find that they can open it more easily than they can lock it, particularly in the sort of the toddler years when you go to the loo with them and you're on the loo yourself and they open the door and let everybody see you. But just double check that they do know how to unlock it, because obviously, you know, the trauma of being locked in a school toilet cubicle and not knowing what to do can be really quite hurtful and damaging to them. So what I would recommend there, if you haven't visited the school, and particularly if you're not able to visit the school, is ask the school if they can just, I know you'll probably think you're insane when you ask them this, but could you send me a picture of the inside of the toilet door lock for the children so that I can see what it's like, so I can practice it with my child, and find somewhere locally like a public loo that has similar, or even find, you know, draw a picture or find a video, or just talk about how to open it with them. What else? So a lot of people, and I'm going to talk about this again and again as we go through this webinar, being school ready does not mean being ready for school academically. That's something entirely different. And I really focus on being school ready physically and emotionally, not academically ready, because if they're physically and emotionally ready, everything else happens. I really, really, really would not worry about any of the academic stuff at this age. And you're going to be so tired of me banging on about this later. But there are a few things that would help in terms of literacy. The first is recognizing their written name. So they absolutely do not need to be able to write their name. They don't need to be able to spell. They don't need to be able to read. They don't need to be able to recite all of the letters of the alphabet. They just need to be able to recognize the shapes of their name, preferably with their surname as well when it's written down. So why do they need to know that? Well, if you're putting name labels inside of their clothing and they're going to have the same cardigan as 25 other children, then that name label is going to be the differentiator. And similarly, if they've got a water bottle or a lunchbox or something, they need to be able to pick theirs out. But also when they go in the morning, they will have a peg or something with their name on, and probably a drawer, which is also named, where they can maybe put their book bag and so on. But helping them to recognize what their name looks like helps them to find all of their belongings, and it gives them some increased independence when they can go and hang their coat up or put their book bag away. But please don't worry about them writing their name or learning to read or anything else like that. We're talking much more basic here. Everything else will follow. Recognizing their belongings is quite key. So I would ideally they want to recognize their clothes after they've taken them off for PE or sports. But here I think there are a couple of things that they really need to recognize. One is their water bottle, and if they're having packed lunch, then their lunchbox, or you know, whatever else in a bag that are bringing their lunch in. So my top tip here would be, I'm a huge fan, you'll see later on, of getting, you know, supermarket school uniform. Don't be spending all the money on the expensive branded school uniform. It is not better than the cheap supermarket brands. I'm all about saving money, getting those supermarket brands. If you can, of course, I do recognize that for some schools you do need to buy their uniform and they're from specific suppliers, but you know, if you can, get the cheap ones. They won't last wherever you get them from. So go with the cheap uniforms, or go with the pre-loved and the second-hand uniforms. But there are two things that I'd recommend that you maybe, if you can, spend a little bit more money on to make them unique. One is their water bottle, and second is their lunchbox. So if you can, you know, hop onto Etsy or find an independent supplier, or if you're handy at making things, do it yourself or get something printed to personalize. Because what you'll find when they go to the class is 10 Tesco's water bottles, 5 Asda water bottles, 5 Sainsbury's water bottles, and you know they're like 90% are all the same bottle. So if you can find a bottle that's really unique, that sticks out for them, you make their job so much easier. And the same with their lunch bags as well. But also if they can have, you know, a say in personalizing them, decorating or choosing them, again, it gives them that ownership and makes them just that little bit more excited. So they're the two things that I would spend a little bit more on, just to get that individuality to make things easier for them. So this comes back not to the academic side of things, but working towards it. Two things I would also focus on over the next month or two is holding a pencil. So in the way that the girl in this picture is holding a pencil, and using a pair of scissors. So it doesn't have to be like an adult pair of scissors. I'm talking just a child's pair of scissors, and a pencil or a crayon or a pen, just so that they have that sort of motor skills to be able to manipulate the pen and the scissors. Not because they're going to be doing lots of writing, because actually they'll mostly be doing lots of playing, but just so that they have that skill from the beginning, and it's easier for them when they do move on to it. So what else? We're going back to lunches again. I talk a lot about lunches, how to unpack their own lunch. So there are a few things I focus on here. One, can they undo their lunchbox or their lunch bag? Do they know how to take the lid off of the water bottle? Can they fill up their water bottle? Can they actually get some water out of their bottle? And in their lunchbox itself, think about what you're packing, and are they able to access it independently? So for instance, if you give them a yogurt pot or a yogurt pouch, do they actually know how to open that independently without your help? Things like satsumas, oranges, bananas, can they get into them and peel them independently without your help? So when I was writing the Starting School book, I spoke to hundreds of parents and said, you know, what do you wish you'd known before your child started school? And I can't tell you the amount of them that said, I wish I'd thought about giving my child an orange and the fact that I peel it for them at home, or I wish I'd thought about giving them a yogurt pouch and the fact that I open the lid at home. And a couple of people said to me, I kept getting, you know, their yogurts or their bananas. They kept coming home at the end of the day, but I know that that's their favorite food. And I didn't know why they weren't eating them until I realized they weren't eating them because they couldn't get into them independently. So again, think about what you're sending your child with, and either preparing it for them or having trial runs at home so that they can actually open it. And if they're going to be having school dinners, think about how it's served. So very often school dinners are either served on a tray, which has sort of separate portion sections. It looks a little bit like a tray you see on sort of prison movies, you know, with like divided sections. Or sometimes you get a divided plate with sections and they carry that on a tray. But it's quite likely that they're going to have to carry their tray or plate of food from where they collect it to where they're sitting. And for a lot of young children, this is a skill that they've not practiced carrying, you know, it's sort of wobbly full of glasses and stuff, but it's still, you're still carrying some food over to a table. And again, they will be helped, there will be helpers, but if you can help them with the skill of just learning how to carry their lunch from, say, your kitchen surface to your dining table every day, just increasing that autonomy there will really help them at lunchtime. So a few more practical preparations. How to sit cross-legged on the floor. So if you have a school, and it's really quite common that children will sit cross-legged on the floor. It may not be, so I would double check with your school how they're expected to sit, if they're expected to sit at a chair or on the floor and a carpet. And then just make sure that your child knows what that means and give them a practice at home. And you can also practice something like story time while they're sitting on the carpet. How to put their hand up to ask a question. It's very often not something that we teach children when we're at home alone with them. We don't really have a need to do it. But when they're in a room with 20 or 30 other children, it helps to be able to just say, I've got a question, or I need to go to the loo, or something like that. So just explain to them when you need to talk, particularly if other people are talking, just pop your hand up, and then the teacher or the teaching assistant or the midday assistant, they'll know that they need to come and talk to you. Blowing their nose and disposing of tissues. This bizarrely took my children a long time, like several years, to be able to learn to blow their nose, and then if they have blown their nose, what to do with the tissue afterwards. And it's, you know, it's just much nicer for everybody, particularly with COVID, if they know how to blow it and then what to do with the tissue once they're finished. So if your child has long hair or longish hair, so even if it's not long but it's sort of maybe hanging their eyes, just have a sort of a few practice runs that they know what to do if it's in their eyes when they're doing something, or if they're doing sport and it's in their eyes, or if it falls out, like if you style their hair in the morning and it's fallen out at school, then show them how to do like a really rough ponytail or put a clip in. I haven't mentioned it elsewhere, but one thing that I'm going to recommend here is, if you haven't experienced the joys already, you will very soon experience the joys of head lice. And I managed to get all the way through to my child being 5 before we experienced them. But head lice like to crawl from one head to another. So you can imagine if children have got sort of hair, not even really long, just kind of fairly dangly, and their head is near another child's head, and the head lice have fun walking from one to the other. The easiest way that I found to stop that is to braid it, to plait it as close to the head as possible. And braids, or sort of tightish plaits, tend to be the style that actually is the most child hardy and stay until the end of the school day as well. Any other way, I sent my children in, they'd come home like absolutely disheveled and everything fallen out. But the sort of the tighter braids, really good for preventing head lice, but also the style most likely to stay in. I have found, you know, with all, I talk about head lice lots in the book, but you can use the sort of repellents and stuff. They tend to not be particularly great. It's more just about being aware of them, looking for them, and trying to keep the hair tied back. What else? How to put their shoes on the right feet. So after a PE lesson, or if they've had to take their shoes off to go into an assembly or something like that, to learn how to put their shoes on, but most importantly on the right feet. So I'm going to talk about choosing child-friendly shoes a little bit later, but the actual act of putting them on, in the book I talk about, rather than writing R and L, you know, right and left on the shoes and spending ages trying to teach them right and left, what I recommend instead is that the shoes, when they're placed together in the right way around, they make a picture on the inside. So in the starting school book, I draw the shape of a heart and just say, you know, so on one shoe, on the left shoe, you do this side, on the right shoe, you do that. And when the shoes are the right way around, they make a heart, or you can make a circle or a star or a smiley face. It doesn't matter what that is, but it just helps them to know if they're the wrong way around, that pattern isn't going to happen. But if they're the right way around, you match up, and that's the way to put them on. So you can buy special stickers for this, but my preference is just, if the soles are fairly light coloured, then I just use a dark Sharpie. If they're dark coloured soles, then I would either use a silver or a gold Sharpie. Pale nail varnish works quite well as well, and so does Tipp-Ex as well, particularly if you put a little coat of clear nail varnish over it as well. So you don't have to buy a special sticker, but just creating your own pattern. So moving on, what else to prepare them practically? So to know their teacher's name, to know their teaching assistant's name, any of the helpers, and also to know their class name. So a lot of classes, there won't be sort of reception, year 1, P1 and so forth. Very often they'll be known as something like butterflies and caterpillars. And teaching your child the class name before they go, as well as the teacher and the helpers' names, can also really help them to feel a sense of ownership and to settle in before they go. 2 final ones here before we move on. This is obviously, it's not an exhaustive list. There are other things I consider, and do remember, I'm not saying you have to tick off everything. There'll be some here you think, yeah, I think that would really help my child, and others maybe they can do already, or you just think, I don't think they need to know that, and that's fine. So when they're at school, apart from maybe they will have milk once a day, depending on where you are and what school your child goes to, very often they'll still have milk, but that will only be once a day. So if your child is used to drinking milk or juice or squash or something at home, I would spend the next few weeks before school starts getting them used to drinking water, because when they're at school, aside from that maybe 1 milk per day, the rest of the drink that they have is going to be water. And if they're not used to drinking water at home, then they may well struggle with that being the only thing that they have on hand when they're at school. That then could lead to them drinking less and being dehydrated and all the issues it brings with it. So what I'd really recommend is getting that water bottle for them as soon as possible and just helping them to learn how to fill it up. That tends to not happen in reception right at the beginning, but by the end they may be filling it from a jug, and just really just getting used to the water and having sips throughout the day. And the final thing I'd suggest here is also having trial runs with packed lunches. So I am not a fan of saving anything for best. I remember when my kids started school, it was quite tempting to have everything immaculate and perfect in the packets and dress them on that first day and have that picture and everything being shiny and new. That's like the thing that you want to do least. You want nothing to be shiny and new. You want them to know everything and have practiced everything and things to be worn in as much as possible. So practice runs with the packed lunches so that they can recognize their lunchbox, they know what to do and bring it over and open it. They can open everything inside it. They can pack stuff up at the end and do their box back and put it back on the side. And also with the school dinners, not just with the trays. What I would recommend doing if your child is going to have school dinners is that you contact the school or whoever the catering company is and find a menu that very often you'll find with the catering companies with the menus, they last for sort of like a month and they work on a rotational basis. So you tend to have 4 separate weeks worth of food. They just rotate. So if you can get hold of the menu, it's normally fairly easy to find out what they're going to be offered when. But what I have found is that on these menus, they tend to give things quite sort of interesting names, and it may not be what your child recognizes based on the name, or even perhaps when they look at it, it might not be like what you cook at home. So what I'd recommend doing is having some practice runs of picking things that they would eat. It's really important if you have a fussy eater that they have some safe foods there. And you give some of the recipes a try. It'd be great if the catering company could give you the recipes so that you know that every day there is something safe for your child, something that they will eat, but also you get them used to any new meals or dishes at home in the safety of home, not at school. But trial runs there at lunchtime can really help. I think a lot of people, when they talk about preparing for school, focus so much on the dropping off or the academic side of things, they forget about the recreational side at school, so the play times and the lunch times. But I tend to find if they're the ones that you kind of really nail, that the children are a bit happier and more settled. So moving on from the practical side of things, how do you make things easier for them? So most of this focus is on uniform, but if you're going to be going shopping soon and buying uniform or buying products, these are the sorts of things I look for. So remember what I said, cheap is fine, secondhand is great. More expensive or higher branded things really tend to not be better. If you look at all of the sort of the WIT reports of what uniform comes out highest, it's always the school, it's always the supermarkets. But what I would be focusing on is elasticated waist on trousers, skirts and shorts. So I would really try to avoid anything trousers, skirts and shorts that has a zip or a button or especially a hook and eye. What you want is fully elasticated so they can just step in and pull them up, and then when they want to take them off they just pull them down. Try and avoid anything that's involving buttons, eyes, hooks or anything else at this age. Elasticated all the way. Similarly, I would avoid tights and go for long socks. So a couple of reasons. It's much easier to pull socks up than it is tights. And if you don't quite manage to pull socks up, it doesn't matter if they're all baggy around your ankles, and it kind of does with tights. And for any of the women listening out there who wear tights, you'll know how uncomfortable it is to have your tights kind of hanging at half mast. So we don't want to send our kids to school like that. The other thing about tights is they will end up being ripped and holed really quickly, and it will feel like you're spending the whole of the first time just buying new tights. So I would always recommend going for socks, or to get them some warmth on their legs if they're wearing shorts or skirts, then to go with long socks and not tights at this age. What else? Velcro closures on shoes are such a must. So I would really desperately try to avoid buckles and laces, unless you have a child who is obviously proficient at them already, which is great, you know, go for it. But otherwise, Velcro is your friend. Velcro is your kid's friend. Velcro is absolutely the friend of the teaching staff when they are trying to get 20 or 30 kids dressed and out for lunchtime or playtime. But Velcro all the way on school shoes. And for PE, if you have the option, then just those plain back sort of slip-on pumps or plimsolls, just make it as easy as possible. Try and avoid the laces and the buckles. So with coats, my top tip would be to have press studs or poppers so that they can just pop them shut rather than zips. The zips are easy, but the starting off of the zip is not so easy. And duffel buttons or other buttons can be a bit fiddly, so poppers would be really great. I'm going to skip down to the bottom one and just say, don't go with hats, go for coats that have inbuilt hoods. So we're thinking kind of autumn, winter time here, rather than sending your child with a hat, because they will be outside in all weathers, and it's important they get outside in nature to play, whatever the weather. But I would really avoid an individual hat for several reasons. One, they won't wear it, and two, they will lose it. So trying to find a coat that has a hood inbuilt, I think, is really vital for me. In terms of gloves or mittens, whatever, my recommendations would be either don't worry about them. They tend to not notice like adults when they're running around and playing, or I would either get someone to sew them on some elastic on so they're dangling out of their sleeves, or I do the whole elastic through the sleeves trick as well, so that they're not going to lose it, because you're going to lose so many gloves or mittens that way. So again, labeling the shoes left and right with that heart or the circle, and make sure that name labels you get are really clear and easy to read. So I know that one part of the name labels is labeling so the adults can identify lost clothing, which is really important. But the other thing we think about less is actually these name labels are for our children so that they can recognize and identify their own clothing. So we want to try and avoid sort of pretty scripts or handwriting or something, and just go for like big, like sort of the kind of font that I've used on here, so it's easy to read, or not read necessarily, but easy to recognize their name. And you could also, if they have some symbols they like, or you could do some drawing, you know, look for the star on yours, look for the ladybird on yours, something like that. On that note, I tend to recommend the sew-in labels more than the iron-on ones. The iron-on ones, you know, are better than they used to be, but they do still have a tendency to fall out, as do the sticky ones. They take longer to put in, but the sewn ones are kind of on there for life. Okay, moving through. So as I said, if we've prepared well practically, we've done a huge part of the way of preparing emotionally. So what would I be doing over the next month or two? I'd be doing loads of trial runs of the journey to and from school, so that your child knows the way. So whether you're walking, cycling, bus, car, however you're going to be getting there, I'd be aiming to do several trial runs so that they know the route, they know exactly what's happening, and also from your perspective, so that you can plan the timings, because we don't want to stress them out by making them late. And the more you're doing that, the more they're sort of recognizing the outside of the school, and things are starting to feel more familiar to them. So visiting the outside of the school, I think, really alongside those trial runs. And when you're there, however much of the school that you can see, I'd have a chat about it and say, oh, that's the playground where you'll be at break time and lunch, and this is the reception where, you know, the receptionist is waiting, that's where your classroom is, that's where the head teacher's office is, that's where, you know, point out different things. And ideally, if you do this a couple of times, then you can almost play, okay, what's that bit, point to your classroom for me. What else? Absolutely. I almost think if this is the one thing you do, please listen to this. Do not save their school shoes for the first day. However lovely and shiny they may look, you really don't want to send them to school in shoes that are stiff and potentially uncomfortable or blister causing. So however well fitting they are, it's much more comfortable for them to wear shoes that have been well worn in the couple of weeks in the run up to it. And the other caveat I'd add there about school shoes is it may be tempting to buy them now, particularly if you see some on sale, but don't ever underestimate how much their feet can grow and how quickly. So I would hold off buying them till 2 or 3 weeks before school starts, but then I would aim to wear them around the house every day to wear them in. Also recommend playing dress up in their school uniform, so encourage them to take it on and take it off, ready for PE, but also just to know what it feels like to spend some time in it. And you can do some role playing as well when they're in it. You know, okay, you've got your uniform, where's your bag? Can you sit down? Can you put your hand in the air? It's just so that everything feels sort of known and reassuring. I'd read lots of books about starting school to them. I'm always asked to recommend some when I do this. I don't have any specific recommendations, but the Usborne First Starting School book is good. And I also like the Annan Olberg Starting School book. But, you know, there are so many books for kids starting school. If possible, if you can find one with your child's favorite character, or a YouTube or a TV program with their favorite cartoon or something starting school, that would be wonderful. But I would definitely look into, can you borrow or buy a book about starting school for them? But I also recommend making our own personalized book. So I know this sounds really long-winded and you're thinking, you know, gosh, you know, who has time for this? Like, honestly, 20 minutes, half an hour, it doesn't have to be beautifully presented or crafty or anything. If you're literally sticking some things into a scrapbook. So I would just get hold of a really cheap scrapbook, you know, something like a Pound Shop or Wilkinson's or QD or The Range or, you know, WH Smith's or something like that. Get a cheap scrapbook. And then when they've got their uniform on, I take a picture of them in their uniform and I would print it out, take a picture of their bottle and their lunchbox. When you visit the school on the trial runs, take a picture of the outside of it. And then I would either borrow pictures from the school website, or ideally ask for the school's permission. Can I print out this picture of the school? Can I print out this picture of the class teacher? And then make up a sort of a little storybook. So, you know, start off with a picture of the child in their pajamas and then having their breakfast and then having their school uniform on, and then walking or cycling or car or bus or however you're going to get there. Then a picture of the outside of the school, then a picture of the door to their classroom, then a picture of their teacher and their TA, and then a picture, if you can, of like where they're going to have lunchtime, picture of the toilets. Don't forget the toilets. I love talking about toilets. And then just talking through, and it's really nice that you can tell them a story, but ask them to tell you the story and explain what will happen throughout their day, which is, I think, if particularly with COVID that you can't visit, maybe one of the best things that you can do to prepare them emotionally. So what else in the next month or two? So this is the what I'm often asked about. What should I do? Can you recommend any flashcards or any books that I can help to sort of teach my child learn how to read or to write or learn their ABCs or learn their numbers? You know, forget all of that. They absolutely do not need to know any of that. School readiness is not about academic readiness. It's about a child who is happy and safe and secure and wanting to, with their natural curiosity, just to play and explore new experiences. They do not need flashcards and like, please don't worry about them. Ditch all the apps and stuff like that. So what would I be doing in the next month or two? So my favorite thing to do is to create a before I start school bucket list, which is just some experiences that you would like to do with your child or your child would like to do with you. So here I'm not talking about things that cost lots of money, and actually most of them will be free. So it could be things like find a big puddle to jump in, go and try and find a stream and try and catch a dragonfly, or so, you know, really, really simple things. Make mud pies, draw a picture with water outside or something, or find a big hill to roll down. I'm not talking about expensive experiences. I'm talking about spending time in nature, spending time with you and playing. So really the connection with you, I think, and just enjoying this time. I think if you're like me, I've had my kids at home with me for so long and I'm sort of at the walls thinking I really like some alone time, but this time will go so quickly. And when you get that alone time, you'll be like, I wish I'd made more time of this. So much playing, so much connection. Get down on the floor with them, play with them, climb, spend time in nature, cook food together, but just generally have fun, Having fun and play is the best thing you can do to make your child academically ready, because play is how they learn best. They don't learn through flashcards and activity books that teach them to trace letters and stuff. It's all about playing. Read them loads and loads of books. That's how we get kids to love to learn to read and interested in literacy. It's not making them read, you know, all of the phonics books. It's all about us reading our favorite stories, their favorite stories, and just sharing that joint time together. Play in nature is brilliant for improving their physical skills and their fine motor skills. So if they do struggle, for instance, to hold a pencil, I'd be really about getting outside and picking things up from the grass and looking at stuff like that. The last thing I recommend doing, if you haven't already done so, if it's possible, I know it's not always possible, is to try to find some other parents and children who will be starting at the same school in the same class. So very often you'll tend to be Facebook groups for new starters in a certain year at that school. Some schools now have apps that they use to connect parents together, but I would really, you know, try to step outside of your comfort zone. I'm a natural introvert. My nature is to just go and let everybody else do it first. But if nobody is suggesting it, then what I'd really suggest is say, hey, is anybody up for a meetup? You know, we could go and have a picnic in the local park. It would be really nice to sort of get to know a few people before we start, and so that the kids can play and get to know each other a little bit first. And, you know, I know this is all about your child, but absolutely don't underestimate how important these parents are going to be to you over the next 5 or 10 years or so. They are absolutely going to become your support network. You know, they'll be your new friends. They'll be the people that you message at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night saying, oh my goodness, it's book day tomorrow and I've forgotten a costume. Help, what can I wear? Have you got anything I can borrow? Or is it today they need to take money in for the book sale? Is it tomorrow that they need to take something in for the cake stall? You know, these people will be really helpful. So for you to join that network as well, I think is really helpful, not just for the kids, because actually if you're confident and happy and you have a support network around you of parents in the same sort of position, that will then help your child because you'll be less anxious too. But really, even if you forget everything else I've said, apart from the wear the shoes in before they start and just focused on playing and nature and cooking and having fun, you'll have it nailed. So you know, just to drive that point home, here's another thing that says forget the flashcards, apps and books. They do not need to be academically ready. School ready is much more about what they can do practically, what they can do emotionally, and just kind of fostering that natural love of learning through play. All right, so what about COVID? So this is so hard for me to do because nobody has a clue. We don't really know what's going to happen next week. We don't know what's going to happen next month. And we definitely don't know what's going to happen in September. And your school probably doesn't know either. So it's a, you know, what do we prepare for? How long is a piece of string? So there's not a huge amount I can suggest here, apart from try to find out from the school if they think there are going to be any restrictions in place and what they are possibly going to be. If they don't know, my starting point would be to say to them, okay, so what happened in the school year just gone? What happened last September? So I know it's not a guarantee that the same will happen, but if I at least understand what happened last September, maybe I could prepare for that. And, you know, I'm sure it's more frustrating for the schools than it is for us because nobody knows what's happening, but anything, any little snippet of information, even if it's a year old, can help. If your child hasn't had settling in sessions for school because of COVID, then my absolute must have is I would really want a video tour of the school and a video either chat or just a message from their teacher. So this is something I would say, particularly if your child is anxious. I wouldn't expect them to do a live tour. You know, if they do, you know, huge brownie points to them, but they have so much to do already that I'd maybe say, you know, any chance that somebody could just walk around with a smartphone for 5 minutes and just record, just so that we can see the rooms and the toilets. Don't forget the toilets. And the same with the teacher. Is there any way that, you know, it doesn't have to be a live, but is there any way that we could just have the teacher introducing themselves and saying that they're happy to meet you and looking forward to August or September, and then just playing that video lots and lots with your child. Again, just to really help them if they're going on a tour, get them to point out where they're going to go to next and point out where they'll be sitting and so on like that. And again, going back to that scrapbook idea, if particularly if you can't get a tour, then asking the school for photos. So don't forget the toilets. Where they're going to have lunch is quite an important one. In the playground, if you can get that, and in their hall that they'll maybe have assemblies or do PE in, and most importantly in their classroom, and pictures of the people that are involved daily that they'll see. So the sort of secretaries, receptionists, head teacher, class teacher, teaching assistants, the lollipop man or lady who helps cross the school, all of these sorts of people that your child is going to see on a daily basis. And again, role play their day. So if you know there are restrictions, so let's say that you know that you can't go into the classroom with them, then I would role play what's going to happen when you get into the playground and lining up and going in like that well before you get there. Okay, so the first day, what do we need to know about that very first day? So number one, you are going to cry. I tend to find parents get very anxious about it for their children, and I'll get very, very worried that their children are going to cry and be very upset, but they completely underestimate what an emotional transition it is for them. And actually, I tend to find it's parents that need to prepare more than their children. So I would be prepared to have lots of big emotions, and I'd be prepared for tears. I would allow yourself to get up a little bit earlier to breathe through and think about this enormous transition that you are going through as well, so that when you're there with your child, you're a bit calmer. It's okay if your child cries. Don't worry about trying to stop them or bribing them or anything, but just try to be calm for them, and then find a teacher or a teaching assistant to help. If you know in advance that your child is likely to be upset, then I would have a chat with the school and suggest, can you do it? Is there anything you can suggest to help? For you, it feels like this huge mountain that you've never experienced before, but for them, they do this every year. They go through it again and again and again. There's probably nothing that you're worrying about that they haven't already experienced. So I would really lean into their expertise there. Something that could help is if your child, for instance, is really struggling with all the people in the playground, it's a huge sort of sensory assault with all the screaming and the running and that in the first day, then something as simple as taking your child in 5 minutes earlier so that they're in the classroom and sitting and settled with the teacher or the TA can really help. One thing I also tend to find really helps is, I talk about this actually a lot in the book, that very often when children say they don't want to go or they're very upset going, we misinterpret it as if they don't want to go to school or there's something at school that worries them. But very often, and I would say actually most cases, it's not the school that's the issue at all. It's the separation from us. So understanding that just because they get really upset when they leave you, it doesn't mean they don't like going to school. It doesn't mean they're unhappy there. It doesn't mean they're crying all day. It's just that initial separation from you. So that would be definitely something I'd be having a chat with the school about if you think that's an issue. One thing that can really help there is if whoever isn't kind of like the primary attachment figure in your family, if you can go with somebody else, or if this other person can take your child in and you say your goodbyes at home or outside the school gates, and then somebody else takes them in. So whether it's a partner, a friend, a grandparent, a childminder, somebody like that, what you tend to find is because the attachment is slightly lower with that other person, that the transition is therefore much easier for the child to leave them than if they were leaving you. So something I would definitely consider. Let's do a quick bit of behaviour for a couple of minutes before I stop. So what to expect in for the first couple of weeks. So I'm going to do restraint collapse in a minute. Think about if you've just started a new job and you've got there and you've met loads of new people and you've got new experiences, you're in a new environment, and everything has been great, but you're so shattered. And you get home and your partner's instantly, how was your day? Who did you meet? Oh, who is your favourite? What was your boss like? What was this? Blah, 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 blah. And you're like, oh, I can't cope with this. I need to just decompress. Now I've come home. We do that to kids when we pick them up and we're instantly firing these questions at them. And very often it can make them very angry or very upset, or it can make them completely clam up. So although you'll be tempted to fire all these questions out of them when you pick them up, try to wait for them to tell you, or try to wait for them to tell you in their own time. Very often, actually everything will start tumbling out at bedtime after they've had time to relax and unwind. Some kids will just tell you instantly they see you, but for others it's much better to hold back as though you're dying to know and wait for them to tell you in their own time. So don't rush them to talk about it. What else? So I'm going to go back to restraint collapse last. Never underestimate how hungry they're going to be at the end of the day. Even if they wouldn't eat at that normal time, I would absolutely have a snack ready for them and a drink ready for them as soon as they get home, as soon as they get to after school club or wherever it is they're going to after school. Be prepared for immense hunger, something quick and easy to eat. Otherwise we get what we call hanger, so hungry and anger combined. So be there, meet them with a snack. Really common for a few things to get worse when they start school. Number one is sleep. Really, really common for sleep to nosedive, for them to start waking up more, to have bedtime resistance. I tend to ask, particularly for the first term, the kind of like August to December, September to December time. Sometimes toilet training can regress a little bit, but the thing that regresses absolutely the most, and I think almost everybody will experience this in some way or the other, is behaviour. So if you think your child all day has had all these new experiences, all this sensory experience, they're learning new stuff and they're having to learn new rules and new boundaries, and they've done really well and they keep it together and they hold everything in and they regulate emotions as much as they can with their immature brain. And it's a little bit like they're a bottle of, here we go, I'll show you the bottle of fizzy drink here. So all day they've been shaking and their lid has been tightly on and they've held everything in. All day, they've done such a good job of keeping all their stuff and all of their shaking and their fizzing. They've done such a good job of holding that lid tightly on and behaving, following the norms and the rules expected of them. And then you get home, and I'm not going to do it because it will explode everywhere. And they get home into your arms, into the car, into your safety of your home, and they undo their lid. It's like they say, I can let it out now. I am home, I am safe, I can be authentic. And out comes everything they've been holding in all day. And you might see lots of back chat and rudeness. They might kick things, they might hit things, they might shove things, they might just completely refuse to listen to what you're saying. And very often it's like, I've got a different child. And a lot of parents think it must be because they're mixing with children who aren't very nice. But I would say, 9.9 times out of 10, you are experiencing restraint collapse, where the child has been holding it all in and they've been behaving so well and they get home and they let it all out. And what you tend to find is you'll go along for your first parents' evening and the teacher will say, your child is so lovely, they're so good, they're so calm. And you're like, whoa, I don't recognize this child you're talking about, because you get all the authenticity at home. It's not a bad thing. A lot of people think, does this mean that school makes them bottle everything up and misbehave? It's not, it would be the same wherever they went. They're just trying to hold it together and they're letting it out at home. So it's actually a really, really good sign. Just be prepared to expect their sleep and their behavior and sometimes their toileting to regress at home. I would say for the first term, so the kind of September to December time, it tends to settle a little bit after that, but there's going to be lots of tiredness, lots of sleep changes, either difficulty getting to sleep, waking more in the night, lots going on in their heads. So really this is just about patience. And the other thing I wanted to point out is what we call in our family end of term itis, which was kind of like you would know that they were due for a holiday or the end of term because their behavior and their sleep was just such a nightmare that you knew that they really needed to decompress and have that rest. And again, if that happens, it's really normal, it's really common. It's just a case that they're a little bit full up and they need to go and let it all out and relax at home. So if you are finding any of these behaviors, what I recommend is just please do try to avoid punishments like sending to their room or time out or anything where they're you're excluding them from you, because any of these discipline techniques that involve punishing the child or sending them away from you, actually what that does is it doesn't allow them to decompress and let that out. It makes them hold on to it more, but now they feel scared to let it out with you as well, which means actually everything builds up and then you'll have a huge explosion later, or they'll grow into a teenager who bottles everything up and won't share their feelings with you. So you're not rewarding this behavior by supporting them and listening to them and staying calm and being compassionate. You're allowing them, you're recognizing the need to decompress and to let it all out. If you are interested in this a little bit more, I recommend on my YouTube channel, I have a video called Containment, something like containment, what every parent needs to know. And this explains sort of my approach to discipline and decompression and restraint collapse a little bit more. All right, so I have ended just about with a minute to go. If you want to learn more, then my starting school book, this one here is currently, I don't normally sign point to Amazon, but the book is normally £15 and it's only £5.99 at Amazon at the moment for back to school special. So the book has everything you could possibly want to know about choosing a school, preparing for school, settling them into school, dealing with behaviour afterwards, dealing with friendship issues, dealing with your own sort of issues and transition afterwards, and how to sort of prepare them to move into their next stage and their next year at this sort of time next year. So hopefully there's loads in there. I've basically written everything that I wanted to know when my kids were in the first sort of year of school into the book. So it's kind of like all my parent wisdom bubbling over for you. But as I say, it's 65% or something off at the moment. I have some more articles for free about school on my website, which you can see there, Sarah Ockwell-Smith, sarah-smith.com, and also quite a few articles that I'll post up as we're moving more to the school starting on my Instagram and Facebook. So what I'm going to do is leave that up there just for a second and I'll take a few questions. So how do you help your child prepare when you aren't allowed to do any transition days with the school due to COVID? So I hope I've answered that now. This really is all about the videos and the photos and the school runs and visiting outside so that they really familiarise themselves with the school, but also familiarising themselves with wearing their uniform, role playing, what's going to happen in the space of the day and stuff. Should we prepare for extreme tiredness? So my son's going from 2 days a week at nursery to the full 5 days. So what I would think about here is how the schools are settling them in. So for some schools, it's a very phased pattern. If, depending on which country you are in the world, if you're in the UK like me, then legally your child doesn't have to be at school until the term after their 5th birthday. Actually, they don't ever have to be at school. Then if it really doesn't work for you, you can take them out and home educate. But presuming you want to use school, it's important to understand that actually it's voluntary that they're there till the term after their 5th birthday. So if you have a summer-born child, those between May and August, I absolutely wouldn't hesitate to have a chat with the school. If you do find, I wouldn't do it instantly, but if you do find that they're struggling because of tiredness, then either you could defer a year if it's really bad, or you could do what I did and have a chat with the school. Is it possible that they could go for sort of half days, or I used to pick my son up at lunchtime, so he used to just do mornings only for the first 2 terms, and he only went full time at Easter. But what I would say here is stay in communication with the school. Again, whatever your concerns are, they will have experienced it before. Don't be prepared to suggest something a little bit off-piste, but also I think don't prepare for the worst. Your child might really, really surprise you, and you may be lucky, you may get better sleep at home. So you may have a sort of a happier, busy child and even better sleep at home. But I would say don't kind of catastrophize too much or be too pessimistic, because kids really are quite resilient and very often they can really surprise us. Okay, what do most parents do about keeping snacks like yogurts cold during the day in their lunch boxes? So usually like a little cold pack, so not a big backing great big ice block, more the sort of the cold blocks that you would keep in the fridge or the freezer to help if they've like bumped their elbow or something. That can really help. Sometimes, depending what it is, it helps if you actually freeze an aspect of their lunch so that it's defrosted by the time that they eat it, depending what it is, of course. And also just be looking at for a lunchbox that has really good insulation as well. Okay, bear with me when I scroll down. What about scarves? I just wouldn't go with a scarf unless you've got a kid who really loves scarves and is very proficient at using a scarf. I'm sure I just said scars there, which will be great fun when subtitles come on this. But no, I think if they have a nice jumper and a good hood that's zipped up, I really wouldn't worry about a scarf. Okay, bear with me, I'm just scrolling down for more questions. I missed the book recommendations, so I don't really have specific books. It's more a book that you think your child would like about school. So the absolute best book recommendation would be if you could find one with one of your child's favourite characters about going to school, or a TV or a YouTube episode or something. The generic one that I tend to find recommended the most is the Usborne First Experiences Starting School book, or there's an Alan Ahlberg, Ahlberg, it's just called Starting School. No particular recommendation for them, but they're the ones that people tend to use the most. So I've a couple of questions here that are more about discipline. So I'm going to leave those and just suggest I've got lots of videos on my YouTube about discipline and sort of difficult behaviours if you go and have a look on those. My child is first on the waiting list for another school, the school we would prefer. The school office staff have said it's likely that he'll get into our preferred school before September this year, as they usually get 1 or 2 children dropping out. Do you have any tips for managing this uncertainty? Also, if we end up moving our child to the preferred school later in the year, i.e. partway through a school term, any tips for managing this change? Ooh. I think it's you're just going to have to prepare for both of them, aren't you? And talk about, you know, this school and this school. This is the school you're going to be going to first, and this is the school that you may be going to later. We're just not sure when. Really interesting. When I started school, I lived down in Dorset. And then we moved to Hertfordshire, and I went to school for 2 weeks. When I very first started school, like reception at 4, and I was a summer born, so I was literally there for 2 weeks. I loved it, and then I had to be moved away. And retrospectively, what would really have helped me is if I actually really understood what may have happened, and I'd had some preparation for that second school. Whereas it literally felt to me like I was told at the weekend, oh, we're moving now. So I think just being open and honest with your child and helping them to prepare, and talking about it, maybe you could meet some parents and children from the other school as well. And just, I think it's working with any disappointment as and when it happens. You know, you could still keep in touch with the children from the previous school when they start. You know, it's good to have friends from elsewhere as well. But I think, and also I would have it very clear in my mind, do you really want your child to go to this other school? Is it really that much different? Is it really that much better for you as a family? What would happen if they did stay at the first, particularly if they were settled in? So maybe that's a conversation I'd have in your own head or with your partner. Okay, let me do two more. I've deferred our child so he's starting reception a year ahead. Should we explain this or wait until it comes up? I am not entirely too sure what you're asking. I think you're saying that he's going to be a year older than everybody when he starts. I don't even think that they would be interested in that, to be honest, at that age. I think if it comes up, you know, why is everybody 4 when I'm 5? Then you could talk about it. But I think it's just going to be a non-issue to your child, to be honest. I'm pregnant, my baby is due in October. Any tips on major changes as my daughter will be starting school and becoming a big sister for the first time? Not really. I think it's much more do what you can for starting school, do what you can for the second baby, and just a whole lot of empathy and understanding and as much patience and support as you can muster afterwards. Again, I think it's maybe not about preempting the issues, but just thinking, if something does happen, it's a huge transition for me, it's a huge transition for the child, and I'm just going to be there and open and nurturing as and when it does happen. My second baby book would help there if you want more information about preparing for a second baby. But, you know, again, don't be too pessimistic. It might be absolutely okay. So I think I probably have to end just there. I think we're almost out of time. So I just wanted to say thank you ever so much for joining in, and wishing you all lots and lots and lots of luck for your child to start school, but also for the huge transition it is for you too. You know, it's such a big change in your life as well. I always found, you know, for me, there seemed to be, I think, 3 big shifts for me that happened in my children's lives. The first was when they started school. The second was when they turned into a tween, so that 8 and 9-year-old, which is when my latest book was called Between, is about teenagers. And then the third is that kind of 14 or 15 years when they sort of shift full on to the teenagers. But I think you can almost think about your life divided into different sections. But the school years, I think the early school years, I think are always will have a soft spot in my heart. They're always my favorite, full of glitter and junk modeling and costumes and stressful last minute things like, oh my gosh, they've got to take this to school. But it really is amazing, and you have got such a lovely experience coming up, and just, you know, enjoy it. The one thing I will add is take loads of video. Don't just take photos. In the years to come, you will wish that you took more videos, so go for it and take the videos. Thank you ever so much for joining in. Good luck.